Welcome to the Advance Your Art podcast, where we talk about the journey from artist to entrepreneur and everything in between. You've worked hard to hone your craft. Now take it to the next level with tips, techniques, strategies, and routines used by successful artists to grow their businesses and careers. Now, let's get started and have some fun with your host, Yuri Cataldo.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Advance Your Art with Yuri Cataldo. If you're interested in learning how to build a company, make money from your art, or transition to a new career, you've come to the right place. If you like this episode, please remember to like and share it with a friend. Today I'm chatting with Danielle Glosser, principal and founder of Client Raiser. Danielle, how are you today?
Great. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining me. Because again, we're recording this in the middle of the current COVID crisis. How are things where you are right now?
So I'm in Washington, D.C., and as we all know, there's been a lot of protests in the time of COVID as well. So a lot of my clients are not only struggling to make their art and advance their art practice, but they're also on the forefront of the protests as well.
Yeah. Have you heard a lot of, feedback from them on how things are going in general?
Sure. I think that there's been a number of changes made locally and across the country because of the protests, and so people are thrilled with that. On the art front, people are selling work. Things are very slow, but definitely some sales are happening. In fact, I've sold 3 pieces for clients in the past few months, so that's not nothing.
That's good. That's a good sign. Okay, so we'll get into that in a second, but first off, how do you describe yourself and what you do?
So I'm a business consultant to artists. What I basically do is assess the business side of their art practice. And I created a whole system to do that after working with 125 artists in 16 states over the past 5 years.
Wonderful. So when you say, artists in that term, what types of areas do you specifically focus on?
So I specifically work with visual artists, so sculptors, painters, performance artists, multimedia, photographers, anyone that falls under the visual arts category.
Okay, great. So let's back up a little bit. So you originally went to school for something a little bit different. So when you originally went to college, why did you want to study those topics, and what were you originally thinking you wanted to do?
So I originally thought I wanted to be a diversity trainer. I got my undergrad at the University of Arizona. They had a special interdisciplinary studies program. So I combined communications, marketing, and psychology, which I use to this day. And after getting my dream job of working for the Golden State Warriors with the NBA, I thought I wanted to work in the marketing field. But after one season, the novelty wore off, and I really wanted to focus on my true interest, which was race issues. So at the time, you could only get a PhD in race issues, and I was not about to do that. So I was told to get a master's in sociology and find professors that were studying race issues. So I wound up at George Washington University and did just that.
Great. And then, so it looks like after you graduated, you started to work a little more in public policy and in government. How did that go?
So my first job out of grad school was with an organizational development firm, and we focused on diversity issues with Fortune 500 companies. So when issues came up that made the news. We were kind of flown in to help handle not the crisis management PR side, but the internal side, like what needed to happen in terms of making changes within the organization. From there, President Clinton had started an initiative on race issues, and a former contact had an in there because I really wanted to work at the White House. Why not? I'm in DC. So actually during my interview, my boss didn't ask me one question. He basically said, well, if Cheryl recommended you, I know you're worthwhile to hire, so you're in. So it took about 6 months to get cleared by the Secret Service, but that was my job interview, which was me asking him questions.
Nice. Well, it sounds like a pretty sweet interview then. So how long then did you kind of stay in the, like, say, consulting, race relations, public policy, DC type of world?
I think I worked on that about 15 years. From the White House, President Clinton doled out parts of his initiative to different nonprofits. So I had been working with religious leaders on race issues. So I went to the group that got that element, and I became their director of public policy and basically led 65 offices around the country in terms of anything related to discrimination around race, religion, sexual orientation, gender, ability, ageism. So it really was a great organization. It's now defunct. It was called the National Conference for Christians and Jews, and they had then changed their name to the National Conference for Community and Justice.
Okay. So tell me about then your journey from those early days to what you're doing now, and what initially made you want to start the company Client Raiser.
So it's a great story. I stayed home with my kids for 10 years, and my brother's a screenwriter in LA, and he always sends me his screenplays, which I never like any of them because they're just violent and not interesting to me. But one day he sent one that was fantastic. I just loved it, and I was so riveted by it, and I realized, well, I want to be excited about my work again. So I had been helping him out with some story ideas, and I found a nonprofit that was hiring a part-time person to help with the intersection of social justice and the films that they were creating. So I thought, oh, this is perfect. So craziest interview process I've ever been through in my life. Like they had, 6 interviews. They talked to 10 references. At the end of the day, I didn't get the job, and I found out they were going to pay me $15 an hour. So I was so pissed, I realized right then and there I was going to have to start my own business to have a flexible schedule. So someone told me to focus on what came naturally, and that was easy. It was networking. I'm always talking to strangers and everyone in the room. I just love people. That's what I really am excited about in life, getting to know other people and their stories. So I realized I had a bunch of friends starting companies, whether it was a massage therapist or a psychologist or meditation expert, and they just wanted to focus on their field, not getting clients. So it struck me one day, I was actually in the swimming pool, and I realized, wow, maybe I could start something to help them get clients, and they can focus on what they're doing, and I can help them in that regard. So I interviewed probably 30 solopreneurs over the course of a few months. And in the middle of this process, our neighbor, who's a very famous artist, called me and he said, "Are your boys home?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Can I use them as models?" So I said, "Sure." So he came over with his lights and props, and 2 hours later, I'm like, "Oh, by the way, what's this for?" And he said, "I've been asked to submit for the White House Christmas ornament." And I'm like, "Awesome, I want my kids on the White House Christmas ornament." So we had to go down to his studio, And he said, I have to submit a description. What do you think of this? What he had wrote. And I read it and I said, it's terrible. I said, let me rewrite it for you because I have a vested interest in getting my kids on the White House Christmas ornament. So then I started thinking, oh, do artists need help with strategic planning and project management and research and writing and networking? So I went to talk to him about it. And before I said a word, he said, I've been thinking I want you to represent me. And I was like, what? Like, I don't know anything about art. I have no training background, anything at all. And he said, well, look at your art collection, look at your interest in design. And I was like, what art collection? Like, we have a fabulous art collection, but it never struck me as an art collection. Like, we just love buying art. But truly, we are collectors, and I do love design. So I decided to help him out. And I shared with maybe the 10 people helping me decide, my business route, what was going on. And I got 2 more clients. I got a friend's friend that was an artist and a friend's son. So I decided, okay, I'm just going to focus on helping artists and see what happens. So over the course of the past 5 years, I've helped about 125 artists in 16 different states.
That's wonderful. And I really like your story. That's great.
Thank you.
So what does Client Raiser do in general, and what types of projects do you look for? I know we've talked a little bit about visual artists, but are there particular types that you really focus on?
So my company is basically threefold. First and foremost, I help artists to empower themselves as entrepreneurs. So I assess the business side of their practice through this inventory assessment process where I look at all their branding and marketing materials. I interview them to learn all about them and their work and how they're wired so I can best assess recommendations to give them to reach their goals, because it's all about their goals. There's lots of art professionals that help artists, gallerists, art consultants, and the like, but they have other customers as well where my primary focus is the artist and what they're trying to do. So that's the first element. The second element of my business is I do a lot of community workshops. I've spoken at probably, 20 local nonprofits in the greater Washington, D.C. area. And just this past January, I had the opportunity to speak at the Smithsonian's Herschel Museum and Sculpture Garden, which was fantastic as well. And then the third element of my business is I do represent my artists. And it's interesting because I do not discriminate against anyone based on their work, their artwork. So if someone wants to work with me because they think they're a professional artist, then I'm happy to help them reach their goals, because I believe that there's an audience for everyone. And so I have found some unique opportunities for my clients. In terms of projects that I'm pursuing, I'm always out there hustling for my clients just because I think it's fun. One time I talked a major commercial real estate firm into firing their art consultant in Las Vegas and hiring me to help them find local artists. Another thing I love is I will get called for art emergencies. Like, this has happened 3 times. In fact, it just happened last week. I have a co-working space that does exhibitions, and their curator fell through. So in 2 weeks, they have to pull together this show. So I helped them identify 3 of my clients that will be featured. In January, this happened as well. I had a major nonprofit. The show fell through. And again, I helped them select a few of my clients to have solo shows in a great space out in Virginia. So those are always really fun to do.
Yeah, that's very cool. I said never thought of art emergencies in that way, but yeah, the show must go on,
right.
No matter what.
We can't have blank walls ever.
Exactly. I love it. So I want to talk, I guess, and hone in about the actual, let's say, the artist side of this. So what's some, I guess, common themes that you've noticed with artists who approach you, who want to, sell more of their art, but they really missed the boat on a couple of